Wonderful. I'm always taking such a deep breath and an exhalation that activates my parasympathetic nervous system and relaxes me when we get to go live, because the last couple of months I've been challenged by the technical part of this, and I'm very proud of myself for accomplishing it, but there's always these incredible challenges. I'm like, oh no, I got to Google this. So happy to be here. My name is Dr. Tova Goldfein. And I'm always blown away, and I'm grateful to the internet. We are here today with Karen Neaton. She'll talk a little bit about herself. Rose may come in. She had some family situation she had to tend to today, and we weren't sure we were going to see her. So I am privileged to be here with you, Karen, not because you're just a nurse and an ISTDP therapist and you're amazing, it's because you're just like the real thing. And I just love talking with you. And I think we'd be really good friends if I was there down under, but I'm here at the other bottom of the world, and I'm happy to be connected in any way we can. So Baruch haba, welcome, that was in Hebrew, to the TMS Roundtable Global. I'd like to start out and welcome our listeners. We are around the world, nighttime, daytime. In Israel now, it's 12 o'clock. In Queensland, Brisbane, you're 7 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
7 p.m.
So I'm going to let you speak in a minute. I just would love to hear your healing story, how you healed your chronic pain. And I think there was some autoimmune. And then how it tied into your being a nurse, and then you became a therapist, and now you're helping people help themselves. Can you start there and give us all the details?
Okay. Well, my journey started when I had a traumatic life event. It was about 10 years ago, and I'd already been a nurse for 20 years by then, and I started having panic attacks, which I'd never had before. I became really debilitated by anxiety, and there was about 10 months that I couldn't work. So this was a really huge thing for me. Rose and I had been friends and colleagues prior to that. And so I contacted her and told her I wasn't working and, was just going to take time off. Anyway, so she suggested that I have some ISTDP. I'd never heard of it. I didn't know why she said it. I just thought, well, I've got nothing else on my plate. I wasn't working. And at that time, ISTDP was not available in Queensland. So I flew to Melbourne, and I had some really intensive treatment. So there is, with ISTDP, you can do things like block therapy. So you can do 2 hours for every day for a week, that kind of thing. And that was very common when there were less ISTDP therapists around. So that's what I did. I had about 40 hours of therapy over a few months.
Can I just ask you, I just want, just for the few of the details for some of our listeners, because, everybody says, well, their symptoms are different and their symptoms are worse. And, we like to focus that, we like to comment, the symptoms are not, are just the pain, the symptoms are just the reflection of a deeper underlying issue. So maybe just for a minute, chat about how you managed these symptoms to even have the inspiration and hope to want to go. Didn't you think it was physical? Didn't you think something was wrong with you?
Okay, so I had the anxiety and the panic attacks. That's why I went for therapy. But, I was about, 42 years of age or something at this stage. So I had been diagnosed, I'd been nursing for 20 years, so I had a bad back. So I used to get back pain. I used to get foot pain, so plantar fasciitis, which is very common among nurses and people that are on their feet all the time. I used to get that managed with anti-inflammatories, strapping. I'd go to a podiatrist, a physiotherapist, so lots of ways, but it was always there in the background. I had been diagnosed with Chondromalacia Patella, so this is in the knee. You'd understand that, being a chiropractor. I used to get knee pain. It would click. Whenever I got in and out of the car, it would twinge. So I was nervous about walking and cycling, all those sorts of things. I used to get seasonal asthma, they called it. So I used to have always a script for a steroid and a Ventolin puffer, and I would just take it as needed. So it tended to come on seasonally in winter, sometimes just at night. But it wasn't your typical asthma. What else? I used to have reflux. So I had a prescription of medication for reflux, which I would get mostly in the evenings, depending on what food I ate, those sorts of things, but more in the evenings. So
how did you handle your panic? When you said panic attacks, was that more an emotional, like fear and anger and, a lot of, can you share a little bit about that?
So the panic attacks became very paralyzing. So what I've learned about panic attacks is that anxiety has different channels of manifesting in our body. So it can go into the striated muscle, so that makes us feel tense. It can go into the smooth muscle, so you can get diarrhea, breathlessness. You can get CPD, so your inability to think straight. You get confused, you lose your train of thought.
Wow.
When you get a panic attack, the anxiety goes into all of those channels at once.
Wow.
So you're having this overwhelming experience. And for people that have had panic attacks, they'll know. So the anxiety is discharging into all three channels at once. So it's impossible to work. It's impossible to drive. Sometimes it's impossible to get out of bed for the day. And it would last, for 20, 30 minutes, depending on, and I'd never had them before, so I didn't know how to cope. And so I was just quite isolated at that time, yeah.
You must have been what'd you say, that fear, the fear of like this not ending, or were you angry, or would you go into sadness?
No, I felt quite afraid, I guess, at the time. I didn't know why I was having them. I didn't know how to get rid of them. I just felt, I felt very alone.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So go ahead. So you went to do some treatment with Rose, because obviously you felt psychologically something's going on here. Like
I went to have therapy. I thought a little bit like, in All the Rage, I didn't have anything to lose. This sort of, they didn't know what else to do. You've sort of come to the end of the tether. I had nothing to lose. Rose was offering help, so I had this therapy. And at the time, I remember thinking, this is ridiculous. This isn't going to work. She kept asking me how I felt. I thought,
what about that?
She's missing the point. I'm distressed here.
Like, Rose, stop asking that question.
Yeah, and we used to even have a little bit of a, head-to-head there in the therapy session. But that's sometimes the idea of it, is to reach these unconscious feelings that want to come up.
She would call it, she put some pressure on you to
she
go
absolutely
deeper.
Did. And I thought that was quite mean, because I was already under pressure. But it was different sort of pressure.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Like, oh, I'll choose the pain. I don't need to find my feelings. I'll choose the pain.
Interesting. Well, yeah, I was looking for kindness and comfort. I didn't realize how I needed that pressure and redirection.
Wow.
And to learn from the experience of the overwhelm, to understand what it was telling me, So this, for me, the anxiety was the end point. But in therapy, anxiety is the starting point, because you can look at it and understand and move forward. Whereas in real life, you can have pain or you can have anxiety, and then that's it. It's like, all right, I've got this, and then nothing else matters, and you get wrapped up in that. But really, having the therapy, it's the starting point, because the ISTDP way is to apply this pressure, apply this challenge, to activate these symptoms, to look at them, to move forward, because you need to have that as a starting point.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. So continue. So you worked with Rose intensely.
Yeah. So because I went there for my anxiety and panic attacks, they healed, which was great. So I thought, good. And it was just really, I I then realized I didn't need my medication. I didn't have pain. My feet got better.
Mhm.
So while I wasn't seeking treatment for my physical ailments, I realized that the treatment I'd had cured all of the physical symptoms that I'd had, ranging from hay fever, which started when I was about 4 years old. I'd had TMJ as a teenager, and that's when the asthma came on. I got the back pain when I started nursing. So in my early 20s, I was young, I was slim, I was probably the healthiest and fittest I'd been, and yet there I was with back pain and, you know, taking painkillers and resting in bed and that kind of stuff. So, and here I am now.
Yeah.
I'm 53.
Yeah.
I'm not the slimmest I've ever been, but I'm as fit and robust and mobile, sometimes even more than my younger colleagues. So as a nurse, that's really impressive that I can still move around and have no pain. And
Now I want to speak to you as a therapist, because I know that Rose and I work together with some clients, and I have a few people that my heart goes out to. I'm not sure they're on the show today, but they're waiting for the symptoms to change. They're waiting for the pain to go away. And that may not happen, because the pain is not an indication of whether you're well or not. So can you address that as a now that with the experience you have and being on your journey, your healing journey psychologically, what do we say to people? What would you say? Okay, 6 months of ISTDP therapy or 6 months of working with, and the pain, the symptoms are still there. So my response is, let's just get better at feeling, not feeling better, which is something we say, and let's get in touch with what the message is of the pain, but your pain went away. So let's just look at if it doesn't go away. How would you address that with a client?
Yeah. Well, you know, we don't always hit the jackpot the first time. And there's also, like, with, you know, and I'll try to relate this a little bit to the documentary, because I know the viewers have been watching that and they're interested in that.
Yeah, all the rage.
And there's, you know, it's called All the Rage, and a lot of it is about getting to the feelings of rage. But I have found in my practice, sometimes there's something else. So it can be the way that we see ourselves. It's, you know, like it's an idea or an experience that we expect to have. I know that in the movie, the movie maker, he said that when he went to therapy, he was holding back. He was looking out for the therapist. He was making sure she was okay. So there was no rage at that time. What happened was this mechanism of putting himself last. So, you know, going into that space of, okay, why would you put yourself last? You know, and I also heard him say that he tried to imitate his father from a very young age. He loved his dad so much. Mm-hmm. And while that sounds cute, there's an implication that he thought there was something wrong with him, because why would you pretend to be somebody else?
Of course.
So these little subtleties of looking at the other side of the coin, or turning things 180 degrees and looking at it from the other side, can give insight into how we actually don't love ourselves. And so a lot of my work now, if people, you know, if it's not working with pressing for feelings, that's where I go. I'm looking for love, self-love, and how not loving ourselves is showing up in our lives. And
showing up in our bodies physically, how that conflict, the conflict, the brain and immune system perceive the conflict and begin to physiologically change the chemical makeup of your body. And God forbid, a cancer tumor gets bigger and bigger. So this goes deep. And I want to respond to what you said, which was a beautiful point you brought up about Michael Galinsky in the movie. And, you know, he told a mutual friend of ours that he wanted to name the movie All the Acceptance, but it wouldn't sell. So we're talking about acceptance, which I want to ask you, please, why is this hard? He could accept the therapist feeling, he could accept that he was taking care of her. Why can't he accept his need, like, to be taken care of? Like, why is it so hard for us to connect to ourselves in that loving, compassionate way, which to me is like the greatest pill, the greatest heroin, the greatest cannabis you can take? Self-love. It's a great pill. Why is this so difficult, Karen?
Because we've learned another way to be. So I also work as a nurse in the hospital, and I feel so privileged because every day I see babies born, and babies are born so perfect with instincts to attach to their parents. And of course, every group of parents are different, and so they all go home to different circumstances. And what starts to happen from the moment they're born, they're getting feedback from their parents and from other caregivers about how to be in the world. And so this is coming from pre-verbal times. They're getting feedback about their worthiness from pre-verbal times. And so if they're getting the sense that when they cry for food, that that's unacceptable, they're going to shut down. So the biggest experiment that people know about is the Romanian babies in the orphanages, where they just stopped crying for food. They stopped looking for attention, and they would just still.
Tell us. I don't know about that. Tell us about that. Tell us about that. Was that a study or?
It was. I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but there was a push by the government to increase the birth rate so that they could have more productivity. So it was an initiative by the government. And so that it was getting policed who was having babies. They were rewarded for having more children.
Wow.
And then what happened was there were too many children. They took them into the state, into the orphanages, thinking they could just make baby factories, I guess. The women were rewarded for having the babies, but then they wanted to use these children, these human beings, to be productive. But what they found is they became so shut down. They were not capable. Most of them even nonverbal.
Wow.
So they became useless for the purpose they were born for, not realizing that you can't just create a human and put it over there. That's when they realized it was the love, the connection, the feedback, the worthiness, the bonding that built a human being into someone that could be productive in life.
Or take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So you can Google that. So the Romanian children, they learnt very quickly, and from 6 months of age, they weren't seeking attention. They weren't crying for food because they had learned no one was coming.
Wow.
And so that's an extreme version. But what happens is, we have little T's, don't we? These little traumas, the way that mum or dad looks. It could be their tone of voice. It could be something. And we are wired for connection. So the most important thing for us is to stay connected into our family groups, because that's safety, security, and survival. And so our unconscious is always looking for, how do we stay connected? How do we get approval? So we are wired for that. So it could be something simple like, in my family, it was you couldn't speak while the news was on because dad had a big, hard day at work and you couldn't speak. So, all he had to do was this, and we knew we just had to shut up. So, and people in their own families, they will know what were the signals, what were the signs. They'll remember them very clearly. Yeah. When could you not be yourself? And we learn these, and then they become unconscious, because it's very important these things become unconscious, because then they're automatic. We carry them around. We don't have to think about them. They happen faster, and off we go. So these interactional patterns, the way that we are with people in groups, they're automatic, and we don't even notice them most of the time. They're built into our survival, but sometimes it's because things were faulty. We've decided that we needed to carry that, with us. Whereas if I'm here chatting with you, you're not going to say, hang on, the news is on. Shush, Karen. You're going to say, hey, let's have this chat for the next hour.
Yeah.
It's different.
Yeah.
But if I don't, if I've not relearned how to be with people, that's not an important thing for.
And I learned from the ISTDP work that, okay, so I know my pattern. I mean, I know my pattern. My pattern growing up is I was always saying something that you're too sensitive. Are you having your period? Like that was the response. So how I grew up was being sensitive, feeling, loving, caring, all that under the word sensitive was unacceptable. So I learned to stuff that. Okay. And so I'm on my journey. The point I want to make is that with that, I see that. And I want to say to the audience, and I'd like you to respond to this particular fact, a particular notion about the patterns. When we recognize that, we have an opportunity to stop and be aware. See, that's the new language. That's where the mindfulness works. That's where the breathing works. That's where the compassion comes in. I get to stop and say, oh, there's my feeling jealousy. There's my judging myself for being too sensitive. There's my impatience because of my fear of. So talk about how that happens and how we have to learn that. It doesn't come automatic to be able to stop and bring ourselves safety. How would you do that in your words to teach someone to bring themselves a moment of awareness? Oh, there's me feeling jealous, or there's me being impatient.
Well, we do work on a few skills when people come to therapy. And, the main one that comes up is this like emotional literacy. People come and they think that, they're so angry. And you go, okay, well, how does that feel for you? And they'll say, well, I feel tense and I feel, but the rage isn't there. They're not getting that hot volcano wave sort of thing. So, we work on emotional literacy. So just helping people to understand what those sensations in their body mean, differentiating emotions from anxiety, differentiating anxiety from depression, differentiating even something like depression from shyness. People sometimes feel that when they're standing back that that's just me, I'm just shy. They're not familiar with the language to understand what
they're judging, and they're judging themselves as opposed to, oh, I'm feeling this.
Yeah. And so they're not thinking either cause and effect. So, okay, why would I shrink down right now? They're thinking, oh, maybe that's my personality, or that's something like that, and something that's attached to them rather than something that's adaptive that they've done with themselves. Yeah.
So how did you channel when you learned from Rose about your, how your anxiety or your trauma created these physical symptoms, and how you were able to recover and understand and implement? What did you learn about yourself? What did you learn about your pattern, or how you brought that to your life? Because that was like a pinnacle of like a place for you to take a turn. So thank God those symptoms came. I always say people don't want to hear it, but there's a message in the symptoms, and a gift, if you can look at it that way. And the people from the show that have healed things from cancer to arthritis to MS, they saw their anxiety, they saw their condition at some point as something to teach them. And that's how they could fly forward, because they came out of the victimhood and they got hope. And so you might not have dipped that low, but you were low enough for you to not work. So what can you share what you learned about yourself and how you channeled that for your progress?
Well, there's so many patterns and ideas. Like even, I wrote a chapter to try and...
Please talk about that. Please.
So I wrote a chapter for this book, and we had to write...
Show it again. It's a book about...
So we had to...
Yeah.
So we had to write to the theme Fearless Presence. And I remember, that really resonated with me. I was happy to write about that because, becoming fearless was just about being confident enough to be in my own skin. And I definitely hadn't had that before I'd had treatment. So I guess I was fearful. I felt less than. I felt like I always had to, give way. Like, my eldest sister was disabled, so her needs always came first. So, that pattern, it just kept going and going and going. Didn't matter who I was with, whether they were disabled and needed a hand, I would step back, offer to help. I didn't see that my needs were important. And so, but that's just one of them. There's layers and layers of ideas that, one was that I couldn't be angry. One was that I couldn't even love myself, that was selfish. So there's lots and lots of layers, and people will have a different message that they're telling themselves, which is holding them back. Yeah.
Great point. So continue. Talk a little bit more about your chapter in the book. And so you wrote about what you're talking about today. Is that what you wrote about, your story and how you came out of the fear into you became your own?
Yeah. Learning how to use my voice, how to speak up, the manifestations of TMS that I had in my body. But the thing that I wanted to sort of bring tonight, given that we're talking about, rage and also love, there's a part in the book there where, I had been so angry at my sister for so many things, and I'd spoken to my partner about them. And I said something one night, and he said, "Oh, but you don't love her." I said, "Well, yes, I do." I said, "I do love her." And I said, "But she didn't love me back." And I used to hide the thing. I'd stop myself doing things, it says here, that would inadvertently make my parents sad because Helen couldn't do them. And I said, because I loved them too. I wanted to protect my parents from feeling sad. And I did all these things because I loved her and I loved them. And then I said, but I didn't love myself. Right. And so for therapy, it was learning to love myself. Mm. It was learning to say, okay, I'm CEO of my own life. Who's going to take care of Karen? Who's going to make her needs important? And it was deciding that, okay, I needed to be in charge of my own life. I didn't need to default to anyone else anymore. I was an adult. No one else was going to come and rescue me. And it was about love in the end.
And Karen, how did you accept the parts of you that messed up, that made a mistake, that, felt like, how did you, like, this is it. I mean, we have to look at ourselves in the mirror. Gabriel Maté talks about, I mention it every show because it's very important healing insight. At a very young age, we had to choose our authenticity over our attachment. Yeah. And, you had to give up yourself. So then you find out about yourself in your 40s, another layer of knowing yourself, and you might not like parts of yourself. How do you embrace that? Is that like a little child work that you might have done, or like that you forgave? Did you have to do a lot of forgiving work? Because that's a big part of this. Like, I don't like what I did. I made a mistake. I can't go, integrating the past into the present.
Sure. So, feeling guilty or feeling shame about things that we've done because of who we were, that's not easy. It's really not easy.
On the record, it's not easy, but it's possible. And
it's absolutely possible. And at the moment, I'm reading a book for my local book club, and it's called, I'll put that up too. It's called My Year of Living Vulnerably.
I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
And
Who's the
so this
author?
is our
Who's the
book.
author, Karen?
The author is Rick Morton.
Okay.
Okay.
Wonderful.
And he also talked about the Romanian children, but
Wow.
he also talked about the monkeys, the primates they were given options to go for food. So they made like a wire monkey mum, and it had a teat with food. And then there was another monkey with soft terry toweling, and the baby monkeys could choose food or comfort, and they chose comfort,
Oh,
right?
wow.
So while they thought that they would go to the ones where there were the teats, what they did was they snuggled in with the comfort. They'd go when they had to get the food, but they'd come back for the comfort. And I'd never heard of this. I'd heard of that part of the research, but I'd never heard of the part of the research where there was also a big, scary monster type thing that they created, gnashing teeth, big eyes, loud sounds. And so the baby primates, what happened was they went to the comfort part, and when they felt safe enough, they fought back.
Wow.
And so without that comfort, none of them had the capacity to fight back at this gnashing,
Protect
aggressive,
themselves. To protect themselves.
this thing that was coming at them. And I thought it's so important, because a lot of people don't have that safe place. And really, that's what the therapist is. It's a safe place for you to feel safe enough to get that courage to fight for yourself.
And it becomes a relationship, a healthy relationship between you and the therapist. And you get to take that relationship and play it out in your life where the patterns were created, where you keep falling and, getting a bloody nose, but I say, get up and then you get to create that safe relationship. That was the first time I ever heard that in therapy years ago. The therapist was like, well, we're here creating a healthy relationship. I was like, that's interesting. So because I always thought, how safe do we feel in the therapist's room? And then what am I going to do when I leave? So you're giving them that physical experience, psychological experience, chemical. I mean, this is energy. So we can take that out from the room into the place when I feel the most anxiety and I want to bolt. But here I can be, I did this with my. So this is where I'm breaking it down, because this is where we go to therapy and then we don't know how to implement it into the world. So maybe chat about that, because you brought up a great point. It's safe in a therapist's room. I feel safe. How can I take that with me when I'm feeling a war zone, which is just going to work or being with my husband, or that's the moment where we apply it and we get to see that we were able to create that safe place.
Yeah, sure. Well, it takes a fair bit of discernment, because not everybody's safe, and sometimes you're going to be yourself and you're going to be criticized anyway. So it's really about being able to read the room, experience yourself, and have the confidence, I guess, to be yourself regardless. If someone says, oh, I hate the way you wear your hair, or you're too fat, or whatever it is, it's not going to go in and pierce your heart, because you've got this experience of being okay. You're not worried about the likes or something like that. So I guess it's about building up this inner sense of who we are, and that we belong in the world, and that type of thing.
Yeah.
And you can have that experience sometimes for the first time in therapy. And then there might be some friendships, or if you're lucky enough, it happens in your family, where you, can really start to experience yourself as worthy, as valuable, as, someone that's entitled to take up space in the world.
Yeah.
So
And that's how I think I get people that complain, well, I don't want to just do talk therapy. I want action. And I'm like, we have to get there from the talk, but then you get to play that out in your world. Like, I'm with you all week. Like, I'm here helping you and supporting you, from afar, that you're going into the world. Again, I'm breaking down because I really wish every therapist would be, okay, our goal is that what you experience here is safe and that you can bring that into the world. Like, that would be a wonderful goal, action step. Now, I want homework. I want you to go in the world and have, you're going to come into experiences that are going to be difficult because you're creating them, because you're kind of pulling them to you, creating those sort of walls and climbs. And here's an opportunity. So I've been working a lot on helping people implement and apply it into their life. So maybe you can chat about something, that happened to you where you saw yourself implementing and applying what you learned in therapy around your anxiety and how you were able to move through it and not hurt yourself. Because I think this is where the people lose belief. They lose their belief and hope that they can do it. Well, I feel so safe with you, Karen, in therapy. I can't go out. Like, where do we help them believe they can do this? Because they created it with you. You didn't create it. You're just the vehicle. You're just the conduit. They did the work in the therapy. So how do you instill belief and hope and confidence that they can do this out in the world, which, again, we give a lot of power that the world can hurt us, and it's safe in the therapy room. Let's
Sure.
talk about that, because that, one of the things with Sarno in the movie was, like, he was very black and white about like what the question was asked in one of his classes. What do I do when I go out there and people are making fun of me that I'm having pain and they don't understand what I'm doing with your, it's like, just forget about it. Just don't be with them. That's not so easy. He was very black and white. And I would be more like, be with that person, feel uncomfortable, speak your truth, understand you're going to feel anxious, feel your, like, what would you say to that if a client asked you, how would that work? Are you with me? Did I lose you?
No, I think, when someone has an internal focus and they have self-belief, it takes a different level of a knock, I guess, to knock them off or to make them feel anxious. You want to be working with a therapist that's very you-focused for a start. So, what are your problems? And we want to work with examples. So, okay, well, this happens at work and it's a problem for me. And even just helping them to articulate what the problems for them are in their life is empowering, because all of a sudden someone wants to know, what are your problems? A lot of people, even in marriages, haven't been asked that. This is an hour to talk about you. And even that intervention, what problem would you like me to help you with, can just have people sitting back and going, oh, hang on, I don't know. And they go blank because they're not even used to being asked for what would they like to do. Yeah. So they're so used to just thinking, well, what would you like to talk about for the hour? It's like, well, this is your session, Yeah. So the interventions are about, being able to target things that are impacting that person's life. So they bring their problems and their experiences for us to work with. Mm-hmm. And then eventually, sometimes people can see that, well, this is really silly. Why should I be caring? I don't even like those people. And, people might make different choices. They'll just sit with another group at lunchtime, or they might read a book and realize they actually haven't got their people there. Some people then go on to change jobs. Like people, people are very capable, as of being their own therapist and healing themselves. And we just are able to help them uncover what their heart desires, and then they go on to make those changes for themselves. Sometimes they'll come back and they'll go, I ended that relationship, or I've changed jobs, or, I've actually decided I am going to have a baby now, Right. So, life goes and it progresses and it grows and it becomes more fulfilling. Yeah. And all of a sudden, what someone said about a TikTok that they made, it just doesn't get in. They're on a different level.
And that's knowing, like we're asking the person to know themselves, to know their triggers, to know what upsets them, to know the people that challenges them, where they feel more sensitive, and to be the most compassionate and the most loving, and to do some preparation going into the family experience or going to the work experience. And it is all about love and acceptance. And getting back to all the rage, we have a lot of resistance that we put up because of our fear, because of our anger, and then that begins the cycle. And then we get away from that loving place. Like maybe we have intentions to go in, do an experience of loving, and then he triggers me. So, would I be like in the face of adversity and feel your strength and feel your power and know, and again, it's like counterintuitive, Karen, because pain means something's wrong. Anxiety means something's bad. It's not. It's a sign. It's a message. It doesn't have to mean, having rage is not a bad thing. It's something's to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. So, anxiety warns us that there's a danger. And so it's not that our body's not working. It's just the message we've been given ourselves about this situation is dangerous. Sometimes that's faulty, right? So if I'll just go back to, the example of, my dad's watching the news and we can't speak up. But if, let's just say I'm a little girl and we got a phone call and they said, is your dad there? And then I become anxious because I can't talk because the news is on and someone's saying this is important. So, so that you get that conflict. But really, so it's not not a dangerous situation, but in that situation, we have to say, okay, that's not dangerous. And we have to rewire the messages we've told ourselves.
Exactly.
And so that comes in adulthood. We can start our critical thinking and we say, okay, well, look, that's not a dangerous situation. You can actually just say, excuse me for interrupting. There's a phone call here and this is what's going on. And you can imagine working in surgery. I've been doing it for 35 years. The surgeons used to be the pinnacle and you couldn't interrupt them. And it was yes, sir, no, sir. And, and all this sort of stuff. And now, eventually, society's changed. And that's another thing too, because we can get society messages. They're not even just from our home, our family of origin. Another thing that's on my mind at the moment is menopause. So I've started reading this book on menopause, and I read this chapter and I read this part, and it says there's some parts of the world where, yes, sort of menses ceases, but they don't get hot flushes, they don't get mood swings, they don't get aches and pains, they don't get all of the things that are associated with menopause. And it's because women, as
lots
they
lots of labels.
Yeah, and expectations. Women, as in other cultures where they don't have these debilitating symptoms of menopause, they are revered. Their wisdom is sought after. They look, to for advice, and they're seen as special. So, there's an entire society message there. So it's not always just from the family. It can be from society. It can be from, religious groups, ideas that don't serve us. Yeah. If we can decide what's in our best interests,
what serves us, what serves you.
Then that's where we come from in life, instead of all the rules of all of the different groups that they have set up to tell us how we should and shouldn't be.
Beautiful. And I think of, and Rose and I decided to make this month of October, to honor all the rage, and to know that all, the basic comments that Sarno made and his, 4 or 5 insights on healing have worked for many people, and sometimes they don't. And so, what I want to say is that I believe Sarno would say this, but I would like to take the movie and see how it evolved for us, but look at the basic premise. It's about a relationship with ourself. It's about a relationship with our symptoms. We turn a certain age, we stop having, menses, and hormones are changing. It's my responsibility and your responsibility to have a relationship with yourself at that age, when the hormones are shifting and the chemicals are balancing and things are changing. And that is your choice to respond to that. You can respond to that. And the symptoms, what I've been learning in this pain reprocessing therapy work I've been doing with Alan Gordon's work in neuroplasticity, is that sensation plus fear equal pain. Now, pain, there's an acute pain. I stub my foot, I break my ankle, I heal. We're talking about pain, a sensation in our body. And then when we add fear, it can turn into something chronic, or it can turn into a 2-week thing and go away. So this is where we are 100%, 1,000% responsible. No blame. I'm not blaming anyone. This is not easy. I've been privileged to learn this. Also falling on my face with many bloody noses and getting up and crawling with a ball and a chain. It's not like I haven't been there, but I have empathy for people with pain. But I must be the best cheerleader I can be and say, you're responsible for your response. So they're in the menopause situation. You're responsible for your hormonal changes and how you relate to you. So we're back in the therapy room in a safe relationship, learning to love yourself, serve yourself, take care of yourself, know yourself.
Yeah. I think with all the rage and this idea that pain and emotions are connected, I think it's a really big step. It's a big leap for people, and it's so hard to comprehend. So, I've been thinking about it a lot, because I think, how can we help people make that leap from I've got back pain to, it's being caused by something so unconscious, like a feeling. And bless him, my partner Gavin, people call him a horse whisperer. He doesn't like that. I know,
what term. A beautiful name, what a beautiful concept to connect.
But so he works with horses. He studied them, and we have a friend of ours that just made a beautiful video with him and interviewed him about what he did. And he said, Gavin said, the clients come to him, it's obviously a problem, and say, unexpectedly, the horse did this. And he said, nothing's unexpected. But that's because he has studied and he understands and he can see. He's a lot more conscious. Now, the clients didn't lie. It was unexpected for them, but they didn't see what Gavin saw. And I thought about it again from my perspective. So I'm a nurse, and in the hospital situation, when we have a code black, that means there's something dangerous, someone's going off, they're making threats. And, we get them in the recovery room. But since I've been studying, human behavior, and I can see them coming a mile away.
Wow.
I don't need to press the button and call it code black. But if nurses are there and they can't read the signs, they end up with a punch in the face and security turning up. And so is that unconscious?
Right.
Does that mean there's not cause and effect because they didn't know?
Right.
It is cause and effect, but they just don't know. They just can't see. And it's just like the people who get kicked by their horses. Gavin would say nothing's unexpected. Wow. And he offers to teach them. I can teach you to communicate with your horse, to read the horse's language, so you don't get kicked. And I think pain is the same. There are people that can help you read the signs. What's going on? And for me, I'm just curious now. I did most of my healing 8 years ago, but things crop up. And it was probably about, 2 years ago, I took time off training because I was completing my master's, and Rose had some training she was going to do on the Gold Coast, and she couldn't make it for some reason. And she said, "You take my ticket." I said, "Oh, that'd be great," So just a weekend of training. And the weekend of training come, and I got the deepest back pain I could. I thought, I don't know how I'm going to get there, right? And so I immediately thought about rage, and I thought it wasn't connecting. And that's when I thought, you know what? I felt like I didn't deserve to be there because I hadn't paid the ticket and I hadn't been studying with the group. I'd been off doing my own thing. Mm-hmm. So I had a little internal story there that wanted to punish me.
You weren't worthy. You weren't worthy.
Yeah. So it's a big leap to go from back pain to rage. There's often some steps and some stories in between, and it's about understanding, learning. What are your signs? How can you be more conscious about what's going to come and hit you in the face?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It reminds me, I have a client who, she wants to give up all the time, but she doesn't give up. But that saying, "I'm going to give up," is her signal that it's somehow, I'm seeing the pattern of I'm going to give up. It's hopeless. And so that's her anxious signal of hitting rock bottom, and she hasn't even hit rock bottom yet, but this rock, and then she gets some hope, but it's not a healthy cycle, because we want her to come out of that uncomfortable place, that really, 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 that place of there's always that magical moment that people can make a shift because they've gone on the other side of the pain. They've gone on the other side of the anxiety. And said, "This is where I haven't been before. This is the place where I was going to give up, and I'm worth it." That's the place. And sometimes it's a minute away. It's a thought away. That's how powerful it can be. It's not like something's going to happen, the world's going to open up. I have to go to that black, dark place. So you had back pain. You could have been "Okay, I'm going to not go." But you went to that dark, scary place with the back pain, uncomfortable, feeling like you weren't deserving, maybe that you were this less than student. Chat about how you made that decision in that scary moment with the high anxiety to still go forward, because that's the moment when we have to tell our brain, neurologically, everything's okay, but tell our little girl that everything is okay.
Well, I've only worked out what that mechanism was because I got that back pain and I haven't been able to work it out until recently. So this is 2 years ago. So it took me 18 months, maybe even more. I've only worked it out in the last month or two, what it was that caused the back pain that weekend. So I stayed curious, but then I realized, I thought that I wasn't entitled to be there, that I was a bit of an imposter, that, I hadn't paid for the ticket, and that everyone else had been training and I'd gone off and done something else. So I felt a bit less than.
What's the feeling? What was the feeling? What was the deep core feeling that brought on
not enough.
No, that's a thought. What was the feeling that drove that, like Rose would say, that drove the anxiety? What was the feeling that drove the pain? What was the deep feeling that made the body take all the blood and oxygen from your muscles in your back? What was the deep feeling?
Well, the pain was going to distract me and give me, I guess, a reason to not be in that experience of less than with the group.
Yeah. Because somehow the experience was a threat. You made that, I'm not there, I'm here.
Yeah.
So maybe you
Because
felt
that's
sad
painful.
or, yes.
It's painful, right? Feeling not good enough.
Yes.
Is very painful. And so to give yourself back pain, I didn't consciously do that, was maybe a way out that I didn't have to go, that
Face up and face yourself and face.
I didn't have to experience not being on a par with my peers that whole weekend. And it wasn't just a day, it wasn't just a session,
Right.
but the experience of feeling less than. And so
wow.
Yeah.
I wanted, we could do a whole session on the feeling of sadness that you're not good enough, or fear or anger that judgment. Why are you feeling this way, Karen? Like, get a life, like just move on, like all those deep core feelings. So I wanted to answer, Nikki has a question for you.
Hi, Nikki. So does rage cause back pain? So back pain is a massive phenomena. People have turned up with back pain for a long, long time. And that's, to hospitals I'm talking about, just being a nurse. They've come for back surgery. They've come to the ED for painkillers. They get referred for all these tests because, back pain can be a sign of something sinister. It can be a tumor. It can be, referred from something else. Something can be going on in the tummy or whatever.
An acute disc problem that lasts a few months, 6 months, and then it goes away. It's not like acute pain comes and goes. That's what I just want to say. So I think Nikki might be talking about chronic pain.
Yeah. So, well, acute pain, that weekend that I had that pain, it was acute. It only lasted two days, but
there was no cause. But there was no cause.
It had so there was nothing physically wrong. So the pain was there as the distraction, I guess we would call it, for what I was trying to avoid showing up in my life. Yeah. So Nikki, the whole premise of rage causing back pain is what's behind this documentary, and it follows the journey of that young man and
Michael Galinsky.
And he'll be on next week. Is that right? He's coming on to talk
he's
about,
coming on with Dr. David Clark, who talks about childhood trauma. So, in adding to what you're saying, it's that repressed feelings cause chronic pain. Repressed feelings. So rage is anger. Rage is expressed anger. So, and Nikki's saying, to her knowledge, there's no physical problem. So, and again, even if I like to say on the record, even if it is a physical problem, we still have an ability to respond to our symptoms and be stronger with them and learn. And I mean, people that have chronic situations can heal with this work, can have a quality life. This is not just black and white back pain healing. I've worked with people with autoimmune disease, and I'm on the record, and PBDA, the Physio-Psychological Association Disorders or Stress Illness. Gabriel Matei's book is When the Body Says No. We're talking about all disease, all health. We're talking about taking responsibility and loving yourself and understanding your body. So that's a different topic. But Nikki, I think that repressed feelings cause unnecessary pain. And that's what, body, mind, medicine is about. I just want to thank anyone else who commented. I wanted to just put up Cheryl, who's always happy when we're going evening in Queensland, because that's where she lives. She did some amazing healing she had every itis you can name. So a lot of autoimmune, every itis. And she was she worked with Rose and I a little bit. She is airline stewardess. Can you imagine the stress? It's like a nurse. It's like a nurse in the recovery room. Same thing. And I don't know Rose. Do you know Rose?
Yes, I do know Rosie. She's a nurse as well. So she would have seen this. Her career's lasted for a long time, and she'd be very aware that,
Amazing.
you know, people turn up with back pain now, they're sent home. They you know, Medicare don't allow MRIs for people with back pain over the age of 50 anymore. They've realised it's just costing the resources. They're not there. You know, there is research now, the role of emotions in pain. You know, it's just getting it into practice and having the people that can explain that.
And it's really beautiful to
in
hear
a palatable way.
Right. And it's to hear from a nurse, an RN, and a medical doctor, you know, and Rosie. I'd love to meet you, Rosie. I'm happy that you're on our show. And, you know, and I always talk about, you know, Rose Hoyes being a nurse and a midwife. You know, she's able to come and say, this pain is body-mind. This pain is psychological. Yes, your pain is real. And now there's the research, there's the MRIs, but not all doctors are up to that. And it's not for us to have rage with our doctors. It's for us to be educated, which is the reason for this show, is to be educated that I like to say that you can be the doctor. And so I can imagine being a nurse. I mean, I can't imagine. What an amazing job. And you went into being a nurse to help others, which is another whole series of shows we could have. And I know there's an organization in America about nurses who are doing mind body work, and what a beautiful combination. So I imagine there's enormous stories and you've told a few when the first time we met about connecting with people and how they can go into their surgery and how they can come out in such a healthier way. I mean, ISTDP in the hospital, it must be an incredible opportunity, and you're doing it. You're not getting in, like you're doing it in your being, because my work is like who I am in the grocery store, you know, or my car. It becomes weird because I'm keep trying to connect to me as a better person, a better doctor, a better mother, a better grandmother. I want to just bring up Joseph visited the show. Joseph is he's here in Israel. He's a friend. He's a dentist, and he's from Australia, and he developed enormous back pain while he was sitting shiva for his wife that passed.
Yeah.
So it came up, and
grief can do it too. Yeah, if you want to hold it in. I think in the movie, this documentary, you know, Michael said, you know, he wanted to cry, but it wasn't the time or the place, and so we place these restrictions on when something can come. And it's like, you know, if you're a pregnant woman and your waters break, they just break. You don't judge them. You say it wasn't the time or the place. It just happened. And you know, we don't want to judge that. And it should be the same for grief. If grief comes when you're interacting at a supermarket, just that it's not the time or place places enough judgment that it wants to retreat.
Sure.
So,
yeah,
you know, I like to say.
I'm sorry, I interrupted.
I just like to say to people, you know, because people will say, let's just say it was Michael Galinsky and he said it wasn't the time or the place for sadness.
Yeah.
You know, would you say that to your best friend?
Yeah.
If someone was sad, would you go, hey, mate, it's not the time or the place now? And, you know, they say, no, I would not say that. And I say, why are you saying it to yourself? And, and just help them to see how they're not treating themselves like their own best friend.
Yeah.
You know, for some reason they hold themselves to this critical standard that they can never, whatever's natural for them, it's not right.
And in the movie, Michael Galinsky, he laughed, you know, and she noticed that, you know, the therapist was like, you know, you're laughing, which was his defense mechanism. And in regards to what Joseph, you know, when you sit shiva for a deceased, and it was his wife and his love and his soulmate, you're not even in a place to be able to feel the grief because you're sitting shiva. and people are there. It's only when the shiva really ends and you're in your life that you get to really experience the grief. So here he probably held in all these feelings, you know, being the good father and good husband that he was. And, you know, people come and visit you and share during that 7 days, and you're davening and the Beit Knesset in the synagogue. And then you're living your life and you're like, oh my God, I'm alone. I'm full of grief. I'm full of sadness. I'm full of fear about my future. This was not expected. I was supposed to die with this woman. So it becomes this process. And then it got into also that, you know, Joseph was a child of survivors from the Holocaust, and he was left alone a lot at home. And he did incredible work on why back pain when his wife died.
Yeah.
You know, why back pain when you're on your way to a great seminar to learn. So it's fascinating when we get to unravel or scaffold, the word that Rose uses, to understand ourselves. So Rose has shared a little bit. Her work is been largely with people at the end of life for quite some time, a very different job at accepting people where they're at. Wow. Quite courageous, Rosie. What an experience. So here, if we can further discuss with Nikki, Karen.
Yeah, so, you know, when people want to start discussing rage, you know, people will, and, you know, so what your question there is, if pain's 10 out of 10, does that mean the repressed emotion is 10 out of 10? The short answer would be yes. So a lot of people will come and say, okay, well, yeah, I guess I am annoyed, you know, and we'd put annoyed on a spectrum, and that might be 1 or 2, but it's on the anger spectrum. And so they might be annoyed, or they might be pissed off, you know, that might be 3 or 4. And then rage might be 5 or 6, you know, but in therapy, we also have this thing called murderous rage. So this is the 10 out of 10. And often the 10 out of 10 physical pain is connected to murderous rage. And it's the type of rage that makes people want to do that sort of thing. So being able to experience that in a safe environment where you're not judged, where the rage is validated. And the next question there is, so can the pain come years later? Absolutely. So when I did my work in my 40s, I was experiencing murderous rage for things that happened to me when I was 7, when I was 15, when I was 20, you know, when I was 30, and even things that were happening in the current, things that I held in. I experienced the panic attacks instead and said, okay, I need to get back to work. And so I experienced the rage. And so in the beginning, it was curiosity. I wanted to see how this worked. I've got that sort of personality that I like to try new things and understand things. And when I finally was able to have that experience of that rage, there is nothing like it. You just feel as high as a kite. That's all I can say. You feel like you can conquer anything. You don't feel like killing anybody. Nobody dies. But not repressing it, not sending yourself that message that it's not okay, having someone witness the pain that activated that rage, because the pain comes because of love, you know. And so it goes, just to have someone sit with you with loving eyes, compassionate eyes, and say, it must have been so painful to activate that rage. Because rage doesn't just come from nowhere. We're not psychopaths. We're not here to work with psychopaths to give them another avenue to do that sort of thing. But most definitely, if pain is 10 out of 10, there'll be some murderous rage there for sure.
So you're suggesting also in the therapeutic process, and then to do this on our own, is to be with the feelings, to be with the rage, to be with the anger, and I like to say in a compassionate way. Would you agree with that?
And so, and, you know, obviously I've done it enough for myself and with clients that I can process something like that now, but it's still better to do it with a colleague, with a therapist, with a partner. You know, I don't know if Joseph's had anyone experience his grief, but I've had a lot of grief too. And grieving on your own is almost another trauma in itself. If someone can witness your grief, it actually passes and it's healing and it's empowering.
Wow.
So having a witness to your rage, I believe, is the same. To have some loving eyes go, you're okay in your rage. There's something absolutely healing about that.
Wow. That was the answer to Nikki's question, how do you release that rage? And there's Nikki, you can email me at support@tmsroundtable. You know, I have some written things of how to do this, but what Karen just said is, you know, is experiential. You know, in the old days, we'd bang pillows, you know, being with your little child, rescuing your little child. There's many ways to experience that healing. So, but I
like to explain it to people. It's almost like delivering a baby. You know, someone wants to give birth, but it's nice to have someone go, okay, this is what you need to do now. You know, if you wanted to maybe have, you know, there's a certain amount of instinct in your body.
Yeah. Come back. We're here. We went a whole hour and it didn't happen, and now it happened. Go ahead. Come in.
Yeah, and just to help that happen and to bring it into the world, so that it's safe, so that you're not going to punish yourself about it later. You want to work with someone.
You froze. We hear you, but you froze. So, oh, now you're good. You froze for a minute. So
okay.
I want to address Sarah's question. I'm happy for people to be coming in, even though it's late in the hour. I want to, is it the same with chronic fatigue or ME? What's ME? Anyway, chronic fatigue, cognitive as well as fatigue and body and chronic pain. I would say exactly the same. What would you say, Karen?
Oh, yeah, it is exactly the same. And for those that have watched the documentary, one of the therapists comes on sort of more towards the end and said, you know, he was scared shitless when he started his medical training. And he
Dr. Schrubener, when he was Dr. Schrubener, he had diarrhea.
Yeah. And he said, and he got the diarrhea. And so it's not just pain. It can be getting scared shitless. It can be the chronic fatigue. It's like, you know, how does that fatigue protect you from showing up? How does it, you know, like what's the benefit in being fatigued right now? You know, it's stopping you from showing up, risking being criticized, shut down, something like that. There's always a benefit in these things that show up and distract us from what we're really feeling. Yeah.
Beautiful. Excellent healing insights. And thank you for all your responses here in the message. I love that a feed on the Facebook becomes a little therapy session and we can learn a lot. So this will be on our YouTube channel, which I think it's about 133 broadcasts. This March will be 3 years for Rose and I, and we have no interest in stopping. So we have even a dream of her coming to Israel in April and us doing a few shows together. We'll see if that happens. So we will meet again, Karen. The three of us, the two of us this is not over, this relationship. You have so much to say and offer, so much to share, and bringing it to a very clear place for anyone to implement it. And we're not saying it's easy, but it's possible. And maybe you want to say something inspirational about the giving up and the like, I can't do it. It's not worth it. And I just, you know, how can that it triggers me.
Yeah.
When someone so what would you do with that kind of desperate call for help?
You know, that's a whole different lot of work. When someone believes that they deserve a life of suffering and pain, there's your problem right there. What sort of person deserves to live fatigued for 23 hours a day and miss out on their life? What sort of person deserves to be in pain 10 out of 10 every day, for years? So we need to work with, why would someone accept that as something acceptable for their life? Yeah. So that's something to
and then I still want to have hope for this person. I still want to draw them in, but then I can only do so much. You've got to show up.
Yeah, people need to want a better life. They want to get rid of their problems, and then start taking on that responsibility of CEO of their own life.
CEO
and
the board of directors. Yeah. Karen, thank you so much for spending an evening with you. And maybe we can talk about having Gavin on to talk about and animals. And because I've often talked to clients who I said, I would like you to treat yourself like you treat your animal, with love and compassion. It's an interesting relationship. So maybe, I know Rosa would probably enjoy that. So tell him to we'll be in touch. I'd love to. We're all whisperers. We're all people whisperers. We're all understanding others. And if we can apply it to ourselves, beautiful. I'm so happy you brought that up. And I'm loving that you brought up the book. Can you show the book one last time? Because there's other therapists that wrote in this book about fearless presence. And you can get it on Amazon, right?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
There's a Kindle version and then there's a hard copy. Wonderful. So, because clients ask for my story, but that's not my time. So I say, if you want to read about me and what I've done, that's where the story is. Great. But, anyone can read it, and, maybe it'll give someone some courage.
Great. Anyway, thank you for bringing courage again to this studio, to this virtual studio. And thank you to the internet for letting this hour and 15 minutes work so well. And thank you for interacting with me. I really, and Rose, we missed you. We'll see you next week. Karen, blessings and love to you and your family.
Thank you, Tova. It's lovely to spend time with you.
Yeah. Bye, sweetheart. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, we're going to say goodbye. It's going to go